Indian and Chinese troops have clashed on their disputed Himalayan border, the first known incident between the two nuclear-armed Asian powers in nearly 2 years. In a statement, India's Ministry of Defence said soldiers from both sides sustained minor injuries in the face-off, which took place Friday in the Tawang sector in India's northeastern territory of Arunachal Pradesh, a remote, inhospitable region that borders southern China. The ensuing face-off led to a physical scuffle in which the Indian Army bravely prevented the PLA from transgressing into our territory and compelled them to return to their posts, Singh said, adding there were no serious injuries on the Indian side. In its earlier statement, the Indian Defence Ministry said both sides immediately disengaged from the area, and the country's respective commanders there held a flag meeting to discuss the issue in accordance with structured mechanisms to restore peace and tranquility. Singh said that meeting occurred Sunday and the Chinese side was asked to refrain from such actions and maintain peace and tranquility along the border. The issue was also being addressed through diplomatic channels, he added. China's foreign ministry did not directly acknowledge the incident in a regularly scheduled news briefing on Tuesday. As far as we know, the China-India border area is generally stable, and both sides have maintained smooth communications on boundary-related issues through diplomatic and military channels, spokesman Wang Wenbin said when asked about India's statement on the incident, pointing reporters to competent authorities for specifics. China hoped India would be on the same page to jointly preserve the peace and stability of the China-India border, he added. India and China went to war over their border regions in 1962, eventually establishing the LAC. But the two countries do not agree on its precise location and both regularly accuse the other of overstepping it, or seeking to expand their territory. There have been a series of mostly non-lethal scuffles over the position of the border in the years since, including the previously most recent known example in 2021, according to a statement from the Indian Army at the time. In September, the Indian government said that Indian and Chinese troops had begun disengaging from the Gagra Hot Springs border area in the western Himalayas, 2 years after clashes at the frontier strained diplomatic ties. That statement came ahead of a regional summit in Uzbekistan attended by both Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Chinese leader Xi Jinping. Activities in the region remain closely watched on both sides. On November 30, China's foreign ministry criticized high-altitude joint exercises conducted between US and Indian troops in northern India's Uttarakhand, saying that the exercises did not help build bilateral trust, and that Beijing had expressed concerns to New Delhi. China has grown wary of India's ties with the United States in recent years, as China-US relations have cratered and the Quad security dialogue, which includes India, the US, and American allies Japan and Australia, has become more active. Modi and Chinese leader Xi last met at the Group of 20 summit in Bali last month, where the two shook hands but did not have a bilateral sit-down. Speaking to Parliament last week prior to the skirmish, Indian Foreign Minister Subrahmanyam Jaishankar said there had been abnormality in China-India relations in recent years due to border concerns, and that New Delhi, diplomatically, had been very clear with China that they will not tolerate attempts to unilaterally change the LAC. So long as they continue to seek to do that, and if they have built up forces, which in our minds constitute a serious concern in the border areas, then our relationship is not normal, Jaishankar said, in response to a question on Sino-Indian relations, adding that the military commanders continue to engage each other.
Train strikes. Widespread delays as latest walkouts begin. Train passengers are braced for major disruption this week, as a series of strikes is set to bring the UK's rail network to a standstill. About 40,000 rail workers are walking out on Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday and Saturday as part of a long-running row over jobs, pay and conditions. It comes after members of the UK's biggest rail union, the RMT, rejected fresh pay offers and vowed to fight on. But the government says it will not back down, despite the damage done. Most train companies across Britain are likely to be affected, and Network Rail has urged passengers to only travel if absolutely necessary. Travelers are advised to check their train operating company's website before setting out, with delays and cancellations also likely on the days around the strikes. The RMT has held a series of strikes since the summer that have shut much of the rail network in England, Scotland and Wales and threatened to hit businesses in the run-up to Christmas. It comes as workers in many other industries down tools, with bus drivers, Royal Mail workers, nurses and highways workers and baggage handlers also striking this week. Rail workers are calling for better conditions and pay rises to match the pace of inflation, with the cost of living rising at its fastest rate for more than 40 years. But the government has ruled out inflation-linked wage increases, and rail bosses say big changes are needed to modernize the railway. On Monday, Network Rail, which operates the UK's rail infrastructure, said the union was causing misery after its members rejected a fresh pay deal. The Transport Secretary Mark Harper meanwhile said that the strikes by rail workers will be very damaging. Mr. Harper told the BBC he was very disappointed that the RMT had rejected the latest pay offer out of hand, and that isn't a bottomless pot of money. A fair and reasonable offer has been made. We do also need to see reform agreed at the same time, he added. Our members, along with the entire trade union movement, will continue their campaign for a square deal for workers, decent pay increases and good working conditions, he said. Emma Godivala, who runs the York Gin Distillery, said the strikes were hitting her business ahead of the vital Christmas trading period. The company has closed one of its shops in York Railway Station as they didn't think there would be any customers, and bookings for tasting events this week have been cancelled too. Lots of independent traders make most of their trade at Christmas time, so it's having a disproportionately large effect because of the time of year, she told the BBC. Sarah Zarnecki, vice chair of the Hospitality Association York, said some hotels in the city had seen bookings, conferences and meetings cancelled because of the nervousness around getting here and getting back. This happening in the week before Christmas is obviously going to hurt because everybody's trying to bolster their bank balance in order to deal with the first quarter of next year, she said. The RMT is involved in two negotiating battles, one with Network Rail, where it represents around 20,000 signallers and maintenance workers, and the other with the Rail Delivery Group, where it represents about 20,000 workers at 14 train companies. Last week, the union rejected an offer from the Rail Delivery Group which would allow for a 4% pay rise this year and another 4% next year, arguing it did not meet its criteria for pay or conditions. Among other changes, it would have seen ticket offices closed or repurposed, more Sunday working and greater use of part-time contracts. But Mr. Lynch said it would mean the loss of thousands of jobs and the use of unsafe practices. Meanwhile, 63.6% of RMT members at Network Rail who voted rejected a deal on Monday that would have given them a 5% pay rise this year and a 4% rise in 2023. The union said the offer was substandard and depended on big changes to working practices, as well as 1,900 job losses, although Network Rail insisted the cuts could be achieved voluntarily. After this week's walkouts, RMT members at both groups will strike again on 3 to 4 January and 6 to 7 January. In addition, members at Network Rail will go on strike from 18:30 on Christmas Eve until 6 o'clock on December 27th. Mr. Lynch has called on the Prime Minister to meet him to attempt to resolve the dispute. But on Monday, Rishi Sunak's official spokesman said, "We are not seeking to impose government over and above either the independent pay review process or ongoing discussions between employers and the unions. We won't be changing the process." On Monday, ministers discussed contingency plans for upcoming strikes, including using the military and civil servants to cover border force staff, at an emergency COBRA meeting. The armed forces will also be deployed to hospital trusts ahead of an ambulance strike, the government says. But Downing Street warned there would still be serious disruption and added that the country is facing a challenging number of days. Please include a contact number if you are willing to speak to a BBC journalist. You can also get in touch in the following ways.